On October 20, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur wades ashore on the Philippine island of Leyte beside Filipino President Sergio Osmeña. For MacArthur, it's a momentous moment. After the Japanese invasion forced him to leave the islands in 1942, U.S. media published the images of him trudging ashore to symbolize his dramatic return. Even though he was initially angry, there was no landing boat. While he takes those famous steps, U.S. forces, who landed just hours before, push inland against weak Japanese resistance. MacArthur gives a radio broadcast from the beach. "People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil, soil consecrated by the blood of our two people. We have come, dedicated and committed to the task of destroying every vestige of enemy control over your daily lives and restoring upon a foundation of indestructible strength the liberties of your people." Masuda 166. But the battle for the Philippines is far from over. MacArthur expects to capture Leyte and its valuable airfields relatively quickly. From Leyte, U.S. forces can invade Luzon and take Manila and Clark Field, one of only two airfields in the Philippines suitable for heavy bombers. Although MacArthur is thinking of his own prestige, he also wants his Southwest Pacific area to contribute more directly to operations against remaining Japanese positions in the Asia-Pacific theater, especially by exporting air power. But poor weather and Japanese actions ruin MacArthur's plan. Sixth Army, under General Walter Kruger, advanced slowly as Japanese aircraft contest air superiority and Japanese reinforcements land from other islands. Japanese Commander General Tomoyuki Yamashita, recently arrived from Manchuria, is known as the Tiger of Malaya for his capture of Singapore in 1942, but he is not enthusiastic about his new posting. So it's come at last, has it? Well, my going won't change anything. It's my turn to die, isn't it? Hastings 122 Yamashita hoped to fight the decisive battle on Luzon, but his superiors pressure him to fight on Leyte. As reinforcements arrive from other islands, he contests the rugged mountain areas. But by early December, Japanese strength is waning. A Japanese airborne counterattack against U.S. airfields fails, and a U.S. landing captures Yamashita's resupply port at Ormac. He retreats to Luzon with just 1,000 men. Roughly 20,000 Japanese troops remain on Leyte and harass U.S. troops for 4 more months. Despite MacArthur announcing the island secure on December 25, 1944, Private Saito is one of the 439 Japanese who later surrender. To lose one's life in a war of this kind is truly regrettable. My hatred for the Army hierarchy is stronger than I can express. I must survive and tell this story to the Japanese people, or my soul will never rest. The things we did in China are being done to us. Japan will soon be defeated. From the outset, I never thought that we could win. Private Saito Hastings 190. The Leyte landing required more troops than U.S. planners expected, but it does provide a jumping-off point for Luzon. On December 15th, U.S. forces capture Mindoro to support the attack. And soon after, MacArthur views Bataan and Corregidor from offshore, the sites of the final Dazai. As defeat in 1942, I felt an indescribable sense of loss, of sorrow, of loneliness, and of solemn consecration. Masuda 173 Yamashita is fatalistic about holding Manila. He considers making it an open city, as MacArthur had in 1941, and focuses defense in the northern mountains. Still, Luzon has roughly 260,000 Japanese troops in 3 commands. Many, however, are hastily armed non-combat personnel who lack vehicles and communications. MacArthur believes the Japanese are weak and orders Kruger to conduct a lightning campaign from Lingayen Gulf towards Clark Field and Manila. He cites figures from his intelligence chief, Charles Willoughby, who claims there are only Japanese troops on Luzon. But Kruger wants to conduct a cautious series of operations and is skeptical of Willoughby's estimate. Sixth Army lands at Lingayen Gulf on January 9, 1945, and much like on Leyte, resistance is minimal. Within days, 150,000 U.S. troops are ashore. They push inland, aided by Filipino guerrillas who act as scouts and combat troops. As Kreuger moves, the biggest threat is kamikaze attacks on the invasion armada. However, after several days, these abruptly end as Japanese air losses mount. Kreuger advances towards Manila cautiously, repelling a Japanese armored counterattack. He is concerned about both a flanking attack from his east and being lured into a Japanese trap. The lack of initial resistance is perplexing for some. I still cannot make up my mind whether the Japanese are being stupid or rather bright. Scott 128. MacArthur pressures Kruger to advance faster. But terrain is poor for a rapid push, with 217 destroyed bridges on the way to Manila. Although Kruger likely does overestimate Japanese ability to counterattack. As 6th Army closes on Clark Field and nearby Fort Stotzenburg in late January, MacArthur prematurely announces it's secure. 14 Corps Commander Lt. Gen. Oscar Griswold complains. Japs hold Stotzenburg in strength. Though Gen. MacArthur has already announced its capture. Why does he do this? McManus End of Earth 35, it takes the Americans 5 days to take the airfield, and a further 3 weeks to clear the surrounding area. The remaining Japanese withdraw into the mountains. As they close on Manila, the 37th Infantry and 1st Cavalry Divisions form 2 flying columns, mechanized assault groups of truck-mounted infantry, tanks, and mobile artillery. Their orders are to rush for Manila, and photographer Carl Middens rides with them. Sometimes we rode on highways, and sometimes we bounced and trundled along in fields and carabao trails. Almost all the bridges were out, and we forded the rivers, the men holding their weapons high and often wading up to their chests in the water, while the trucks and the lumbering tanks pushed and pulled each other with engines screaming and water. Flying. Scott 136 in late January 1945. Lt. Gen. Robert Eichelberger's 8th Army also joins the battle, landing at San Antonio and Nezagbu. The Southern Landing is officially a reconnaissance in force, but MacArthur gives Eichelberger permission to push to Manila if possible. This is your only chance to take part in the capture of Manila, Bob. You can be the Patton of the Pacific. Douglas MacArthur McManus, End of Earth 69, the 11th Airborne advance aggressively, causing the Japanese to overestimate American strength. On February 3rd, U.S. paratroopers jump onto Tagaytay Ridge overlooking the road to Manila. Only a third land on target, but after regrouping with the aid of Filipino civilians, they secure the ridge by the end of the day. There is another reason for MacArthur's urgency. As U.S. forces advance, they near Japanese POW and internment camps, holding military and civilian prisoners since 1941 and 42. Liberating them is vital, but U.S. forces need to be careful. On Palawan, in December 1944, Japanese guards killed prisoners as U.S. forces approached, including by burning them alive. In April 1942, the Japanese captured about 11,000 U.S. and 60,000 Filipinos. By late 1944, around 7,000 U.S. prisoners of war remain in camps across the Philippines. By January 1945, the Japanese remove many on so-called hell ships, leaving behind only the weakest. Japan also interns 7,800 Allied civilians, with over 3,000 at the Santo Tomas camp in Manila. Camp's conditions are terrible, with poor sanitation and starvation, Yamashita later claims. He ordered prisoners released, but this rarely happens. In some cases, like at the Cabanatuan POW camp, Japanese guards release prisoners, but tell them if they leave, they'll be considered combatants and shot, so they stay in the camp. Opportunities to liberate camps do arise. U.S. Rangers, Alamo Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas liberate Cabanatuan camp and its 500 prisoners. In a daring raid, the raiders distract Japanese guards with an aircraft, then rush in, kill the guards, and free the prisoners. In many cases, prisoners are too weak to walk. Some do not even recognize U.S. troops in their new equipment. I'll never forget the bewildered look on these men. They could not believe they had been released. Our equipment, everything we had helmets and everything else were so foreign to them. They just thought we were men from Mars. Hastings 233 by early February. The flying columns reach Manila's northern outskirts and liberate the Bilibid Palo and Santo Tomas internment camps. At Santo Tomas, U.S. officers negotiate for Commandant Toshio Hayashi to leave with his troops after he takes 200 prisoners hostage. Rupert Wilkinson, then 8 years old, recalls the guard's departure. Some Santo Tomas residents jeered, but G is shushed them. Our old jailers maintained order for a few blocks, but once their American escorts turned back toward the campus, the former guards broke ranks and scattered. As a mortified Hayashi angrily tried to rein them in, Rupert Wilkinson, McManus End of Earth 55 as the 37th Infantry and 1st Cavalry Divisions probe Manila. MacArthur again makes optimistic statements about imminent liberation. He still hopes to capture Manila intact and even prepares a victory parade. But the fight for Manila would not go according to MacArthur's plans, nor Yamashita's. In early 1945, Yamashita ordered Manila abandoned. However, Manila Naval Defense Force Commander Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi remains in the city, and historians debate his intentions. Some claim he wants to fight to the death in Manila to redeem himself after losing his battleship command in a Kells OHS Mi 942. Others argue he refuses to follow an Army general's orders, or is simply unable to withdraw due to communication problems, lack of vehicles, and the need to destroy dock facilities. In any case, Iwabuchi prepares for battle. He has around 12,500 sailors and 4,000 Army troops in Manila. Most lack combat experience, but are well equipped with munitions, artillery, and automatic weapons stripped from aircraft and warships. Iwabuchi mostly reinforces south of the Pasig River in Manila, as he originally believed the U.S. would land to the south. In the city center, Japanese troops reinforce select buildings, including the Rizal Memorial Stadium, Post Office, City Hall, Provisor Island Power Plant, and earthquake-resistant government buildings and hotels. They also defend major intersections with camouflaged pillboxes, naval mines, automatic weapons, and obstacles. Within buildings, Japanese troops construct hardpoints, including crenellated barricades with space for throwing grenades. Locals like Pistaco Jacinto worry about the Japanese demolitions and preparations. Defeat is a bitter pill that the Japanese cannot swallow. Defeat is the one thing that can make them turn into beasts. Scott, 101. As U.S. forces approach, Japanese troops torch city districts and commit atrocities against the Filipino population. Troops force civilians into public buildings under the guise of providing shelter, only to attack them with grenades or burn them alive. To justify the slaughter, Iwabuchi classes all Filipinos as guerrillas, as a Japanese diary reveals. Feb. 7, 1945. 150 guerrillas were disposed tonight. I personally stabbed and killed 10. February 9th. Burned 1,000. Guerrillas to death tonight. February 13th. Enemy tanks are lurking in the vicinity of Bonsai Bridge, Jones Bridge. Our attack preparation has been completed. I am now on guard duty at guerrilla internment camp. While I was on duty, 10 guerrillas tried to escape. They were stabbed to death at 16.0. All guerrillas were burned to death. Toll 456. Practically all those the Japanese kill are normal civilians. Japanese troops even bayonet children in front of their parents and often mutilate bodies after death. Japanese troops also take young women, especially those with lighter complexions, to the Bayview Hotel where the soldiers repeatedly rape them. Luisa Guevara is one of those women. Every night was the same. The Japanese would take girls all night long. I lost track of what was going on. I thought we were all going to be killed. Luisa Guevara. Scott 267 as Griswold's troops fight through the suburbs. He requests air support, but MacArthur refuses to allow bombing and only reluctantly allows artillery, Griswold complains. MacArthur has visions of saving this beautiful city intact. He does not realize, as I do, that the skies burn red every night as the Japanese systematically sack the city. Nor does he know that enemy rifle, machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire are steadily increasing in intensity. My private opinion is that the Japs will hold part of Manila south of the Pasig River until all are killed. Hastings 232. Segue as 6th Army grinds forward in northern Manila. The 11th Airborne makes advances to the south. After clearing Tagaytay Ridge, the paratroopers approach Iwabuchi's prepared positions between Nichols Field and Fort McKinley, known as the Janko Line. The line consists of 1,200 pillboxes and fortified buildings and continues for 5.5 kilometers towards Manila. On Nichols Field, Japanese sailors position naval and anti-aircraft guns, including 120mm guns now used in an anti-tank role. The paratroopers lack the heavy weapons or artillery necessary to break through, ending Eichelberger's hope of a rapid drive to Manila. On February 10th, 11th Airborne is transferred to 6th Army for more artillery support, while the 1st Cavalry Division flanks Manila to support the attack on Fort McKinley. On February 13th, U.S. troops capture Nichols Airfield, and the U.S. increases their momentum. In the south, 11th Airborne Officer Edward Flanagan reports on his entry into Manila, houses, and shops, flanking both sides of the highway which leads to the heart of the city, were torn up by both Jap and American artillery. Tin-roofed houses looked as though a giant can-opener had sliced through them, while once pretentious mansions gauntly displayed charred chimneys and trash piles of rubble. Toll 453 by this point. 37th Division to the north has captured the Provisor Island power plant and crossed the Pasig River in assault boats. The Americans now surround Japanese forces in Manila in the government district and 16th-century Spanish walled city of Intramuros. U.S. forces, though, are untrained in urban combat and continue to struggle. Manila's wide boulevards limit cover and reinforced buildings withstand bombardment. U.S. troops develop improvised assault squads consisting of flamethrowers, automatic riflemen, demolition specialists, and bazookas. These teams saturate doors and windows with fire before assaulting. According to the diary of a Navy lieutenant, Iwabuchi orders his men to fight to the end. If we run out of bullets, we will use grenades. If we run out of grenades, we will cut down the enemy with swords. If we break our sword, we will kill them by sinking our teeth deep in their throats. Toll 462. U.S. troops clear the Rizal Stadium in heavy fighting, while elsewhere, heavy artillery pounds reinforced buildings from as little as 100 meters away. Hundreds of 155mm shells are fired at individual buildings, collapsing some and opening breaches for assault. After 16 days of fighting, only Intramuros holds out. U.S. commanders mass their artillery for the final assault. They identify the northern wall, protected by the river, as the weakest defended point in the Japanese defense, with walls up to 6 meters thick. U.S. artillery batter them with unfused rounds. The high explosive shells bury into the masonry and are later detonated by fused shells. On February 23rd, U.S. guns fire 7,900 shells in 1 hour. As the 129th Infantry Regiment crosses the river, and the 145th Regiment advances on foot, American gunners fire smoke shells into Japanese-occupied buildings to blind the defenders. U.S. troops storm through the breaches, and the Japanese withdraw to Fort Santiago. Fearing high casualties, U.S. troops pump gasoline into tunnels and light it on fire. A 37th Infantry Division reports on the tactic. Every thinkable method was employed, including gasoline and oil, was effective for when things cooled and men entered these chambers. Japs were found piled high, having suffered just as horrible a death as they inflicted on the thousands of innocent civilians they massacred. Scott 403 The Japanese keep hostages in Fort Santiago. And U.S. troops again find evidence of atrocities, including rooms stacked with bayoneted and shot victims, and others starved to death in sealed tunnels. U.S. troops reduce Japanese resistance by nightfall, although defenders in the legislative, agricultural, and finance buildings hold out for another 5 days. Iwabuchi likely commits suicide in the agricultural building on February 25. On March 3, MacArthur announces Manila secure. In the Battle of Manila, the largest urban battle of the Pacific War, U.S. losses are 1,010 killed and 5,565 wounded, almost half from the 37th Division. Around 14,000 Japanese are killed, while 3,000 escape the city. Civilian losses are estimated at around 100,000, approximately 10% of the pre-battle population. One post-war estimate suggests 60% are killed by the Japanese, and 40% unintentionally by U.S. fire. But these statistics are debated. MacArthur fails to save the city he hoped to capture without a fight, and laments the high casualties as well as the destruction of his former suite at the Manila Hotel. MacArthur's staff member General Bonner Fellers writes to his wife, "The long drawn-out battle was caused by a rather futile effort to save Manila and the civilian population. If anything should happen to Tokyo, the Japanese have asked for it." Scott 382 segue, but the Philippines are still not completely under U.S. control. Yamashita continues to resist according to his attritional strategy. Still, the Philippines operation is an American strategic success. The Filipino government is in Manila. Major airfields captured and the bulk of organized Japanese forces destroyed. MacArthur continues operations against Yamashita, including with the help of Filipino guerrillas, often fighting as regular infantry. By May 3, U.S. forces secure Bataan and Corregidor, important symbolic targets after their loss in 1942. MacArthur launches additional landings on Palawan, Mindanao, and the Visayan Islands, and pushes Yamashita's remaining troops towards Bontoc on Luzon. 4 Japanese holdouts. Survival becomes the priority. Then I had the news that an officer of another unit was eaten by his orderly as soon as he breathed his last. I believe the officer was so devoted to his orderly that he bequeathed him his body. This loyal servant fulfilled his lord and master's final wishes by burying him in his belly instead of the earth. Hastings 241-240 seconds. Fighting continues on Luzon until the Japanese Emperor's surrender on August 15, 1945. Yamashita eventually surrenders, and is later tried for his role in the Japanese atrocities. Although arguing he never personally ordered the reprisals, a military court sentences him to death and executes him. In his last statement, he writes, "The time has come to atone for my guilt with my death." However, I do not think that all the crimes for which I am responsible can be easily liquidated simply by my death. Various indelible stains that I left on the history of mankind cannot be offset by the mechanical termination of my life. Miranda, 105. The U.S. landings in the Philippines result in around 16,200 U.S. dead and 47,000 wounded. Japanese casualty estimates vary, with the highest claiming 500,000 killed, the majority from disease and starvation. This would potentially constitute 1/5 of all Japanese losses in the Pacific. Throughout the war, about 1 million Filipino civilians and 33,000 guerrillas are killed, with casualties spiking towards the end of the occupation. The high losses mean some historians argue the Philippines should have been bypassed. Others suggest MacArthur's ego and unrealistic desire to capture Manila intact drove up casualties with his refusal to allow supporting heavy weapons while simultaneously demanding rapid advances. His defenders, however, highlight these limitations came not from desires of personal prestige but genuine concern for non-combatants, especially Filipinos, POSE, and civilian internees. MacArthur viewed the Allied return to the Philippines as something akin to the rescue of a beloved family member, an almost mystical moment of redemption and fellowship. Seldom in American military history has a general felt such a messianic sense of mission and so tight a bond with those whom he sought to liberate. McManus Inferno. Regardless of MacArthur's motivations, the Philippines was a vital Japanese logistical hub, housed major airfields, and constituted an allied government under enemy occupation. With Manila captured, the next U.S. targets are Japanese sovereign territory. The Battle of Manila was one of the rare cases of urban combat in the Pacific theater outside of China. But globally, in 1945, it was far from the only city that was engulfed in brutal fighting. While the Americans were fighting for Manila, the Red Army was getting ready to storm the capital of Nazi Germany, Berlin.